The night my parents were kidnapped, my brother, who's a cop, chose to go bungee jumping with my parents' adopted daughter instead of staying to help. I didn't try to stop him. Instead, I made the call to the police and got the ransom money ready. In my last life, things played out differently. Back then, my brother stayed behind to rescue our parents and didn't go with her. But tragedy struck anyway. The bungee cord snapped during her jump, and she fell into the canyon. They never even found her body. Afterward, my brother didn't say a word about it. Not one. Then, on my birthday, he drugged me and dragged me to the same cliff. "This was all your fault," he shouted. "You planned the kidnapping, also you could push her out of the picture. You're nothing but a demon. Molly's dead, so why should you still be alive?" When I woke up again, it was as if time had rewound itself. I was back on the day my parents were kidnapped. This time though, my brother didn't even try to save them. He ran straight to her instead. But in the end, he regretted it so much it nearly drove him mad. Chapter 1. I shot upright, gasping for air, my forehead slick with sweat. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst, each beat echoing in my chest. The lingering terror of falling still clung to me, but as my eyes darted around, I took in the familiar sight of my bedroom. I glanced at the clock. I was back. Back in the day, my parents were kidnapped. In 5 minutes the phone would ring. The kidnappers would demand ransom $2 million this time and give us 1 hour to prepare. If we failed, my parents would die. I am the Aaron family's daughter, stolen at birth and missing for 18 years. It's been less than a year since I found my way back to them. They became my whole world, my reason for living. I won't let the nightmare from my last life happen again. This time, I'll stop it. I rushed downstairs and planted myself on the phone. My older brother Isaac followed a moment later, casually dressed in a tactical jacket and jeans, his every step unhurried. "Natalie, what's with the nerves?" he said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Who are you performing for? Mom and Dad aren't even here." Then he laughed a low, mocking sound. "Aren't you the one who kidnapped them?" I froze. That smile, sharp and cutting, sent a chill down my spine. At that moment, I knew Isaac had been reborn too. His expression said it all: "Don't bother fighting. You've already lost." Without his help, the events that unfolded last time would collapse even faster. In my previous life, Isaac had been convinced that I orchestrated the kidnapping, a twisted scheme to win our parents' attention and affection. I never understood how he came to such a ridiculous conclusion. But this time, he wasn't even pretending to help. He'd already decided to stay out of it. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Conspiring to commit a crime still makes you a criminal. When you get thrown in jail, don't expect me to bail you out." I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could speak, the shrill ring of the phone cut through the room like a blade. Each ring felt like a needle stabbing into my chest. Isaac didn't even blink. He turned toward the door, his expression unreadable except for a flicker of indifference in his eyes. "I'm heading out," he said flatly. "Molly's waiting for me, we're going bungee jumping. Don't bother calling unless it's important. It's not like anything's actually going to happen to them." I froze. That's not what he said last time. In my previous life, Isaac had drawn on his years of experience as a detective to track down the kidnappers. Within an hour, he rescued our parents unharmed. That day, I was so overwhelmed by relief, so consumed by worry for my parents, that I failed to notice the suspicion and fury hidden in Isaac's eyes. I only realized the truth later when he dragged me to the edge of a cliff. It turned out that during his rescue mission, Molly, the adopted daughter, had called him over and over. When he didn't answer, she went bungee jumping alone. The rope snapped. She fell. And Isaac blamed me for it. The piercing ring of the phone jolted me back to the present, each chime twisting the growing knot in my stomach. I forced myself to pick up the receiver, even as my hands trembled. The voice on the other end was harsh and cold, slicing through the air. "2 million. You have 2 hours. If you don't pay, your parents die." My breath caught in my throat, my eyes widening in shock. 2 million? What? Last time, they only asked for 1 million. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, cold sweat dripping down my back. This life wasn't playing out exactly like the last one. The kidnappers' demands had changed twice the ransom this time. If the money was different, their location might be too. The confidence I'd carried into this moment suddenly wavered. My chest tightened as panic set in. My voice cracked as I tried to plead, tears choking my words. Can you give me just a little more time? Click. The line went dead. I froze, forcing the panic down. Showing weakness to someone like that wouldn't help. Begging wouldn't save anyone. What mattered now was getting the ransom ready and figuring out their location. I scribbled down everything I remembered from my last life. 2 kidnappers, both young men. One of them had used his home as a hideout. The ransom drop was at the south entrance of the train station, specifically, the 3rd trash bin. Last time, Isaac tracked them down before they could collect the money. He rescued our parents unharmed, and the ransom was recovered. Those memories gave me just enough clarity to act. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Then I made another call to Kyle, my father's close friend and business partner. I asked him to have the company accountant prepare cash immediately. Kyle sounded as panicked as I felt. Call the police, Natalie. I'll handle the money, he assured me. That gave me the smallest sense of relief. 2 minutes later, the local police arrived. But the moment I saw who stepped through the door, my stomach sank. It was Landon, Isaac's colleague and closest friend. His expression was cold, his tone even colder. Natalie, he said sharply. Your brother called me. Lucky for you, I was nearby. Then, with a glare that cut through me, he added, false alarms are a crime, you know. At that moment, every ounce of hope I had shattered. Isaac. He'd sabotaged me. He still believed I was behind the kidnapping, so he sent Landon to deal with me to shut me down before I could stir up trouble. No detectives. No tactical team. No help. Without their resources, how was I supposed to save my parents? My hands trembled as I clutched the paper I'd written on, crumpling it in frustration. The thought of my parents suffering, trapped in some unknown place with those men, broke me. Tears blurred my vision as I finally lost control. Landon, I sobbed, my voice cracking. I'm not lying. I'm an adult, I'll take responsibility for my actions. Please, I'm begging you. I need your help. My parents need your help. I couldn't stop myself from crying, my chest heaving as I gasped for air. My eyes darted to the clock. 10 minutes had already passed. Time was slipping away. Landon flopped onto the couch, scrolling through his phone like this was just another boring day at work. Even as I cried, his face remained completely unmoved. You orphans, he said coldly. Always so manipulative. You think a few tears can guilt people into helping you? Then he smirked, his words laced with venom. Isaac's right. Kids like you, who didn't grow up in the family, just don't fit in. You're not even on the same page as the rest of us. Molly's so much better than you, so much more considerate. Molly. She and I had lived such different lives despite sharing the same fate. She had been adopted into the Aaron family at 8 years old and had grown up in comfort, treated like a precious jewel. Especially by Isaac. His protectiveness over her bordered on obsession. Even now, as adults, they still share a bed sometimes. The ticking of the clock pulled me out of my thoughts. I forced myself to straighten up, swallowing the storm of emotions threatening to overtake me. Landon, I said firmly, making sure my voice didn't waver. You're on duty. That means you have an obligation to handle my report. He cut me off with a sharp laugh, his tone dripping with mockery. Who do you think you are, talking to me like that? He sneered. Just because you're back in the Aaron family, you think you can boss everyone around? Let me tell you something, to that family, you're still an outsider. His words hit like a slap to the face. Your brother told me everything. He continued, his smirk deepening. Your parents don't even love you that much. They can't stop mixing up your name with Molly's. You're just jealous. He said, popping a piece of fruit into his mouth as if this were all a joke. Always scheming for attention. That's why Molly had to move out. She couldn't stand living with you. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself not to react. I knew these weren't Landon's words. They were Isaac's narrative he'd been feeding Landon for years. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a manipulative troublemaker. But right now, I didn't care what they thought of me. I stepped closer, meeting Landon's gaze head-on. What will it take for you to believe me? I asked, my voice steady despite the fire burning inside me. My parents are in real danger. If we miss the critical window to save them, can you live with that on your conscience? Landon froze, the fruit halfway to his mouth. His hand stilled as he stared back at me, almost considering it. Then he shrugged, tossing the fruit into his mouth as he stood up. Fine, he said, his tone dismissive. Report me if you want. Kids like you could use a good lesson anyway. Before he could finish, the door swung open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence commanding the room. Is Natalie here? One of them asked. We received a report and are here to investigate. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. Relief washed over me so suddenly that it left me dizzy. My parents finally had a chance to be saved. As soon as the officers entered, Landon shot up from the couch, striding over to shake their hands with exaggerated friendliness. We're all on the same team here, he said smoothly, flashing a grin. I just dropped by to check on Isaac's little sister. It was only then that I noticed Landon wasn't in uniform. He'd come in plain clothes. Before I could say anything, he casually made his way toward the door, clearly intending to slip out. But the officers blocked his path without hesitation. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. Officers, please? My parents have really been kidnapped. I even have a recording of the ransom call to prove it. Finally, the recording I'd made earlier came into play. As the kidnappers' voices filled the room, Landon instantly paled, his smug composure unraveling. But Isaac said. He stammered, his voice shaky. He told me this was all an act. That she was making it up. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. I didn't have the energy to argue with him. Instead, I focused on the crumpled piece of paper in my hand, carefully smoothing it out. The fragmented memories of my last life were blurry and incomplete, but I forced myself to concentrate, piecing together every detail I could recall. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words to convince the officers. Officers, I think I've seen the suspects before, I said, trying to sound confident. They were near my house recently. Their voices matched 2 men who stopped me to ask for directions. I'm not completely sure, but... Before I could finish, the officers called in reinforcements. A sketch artist arrived with surveillance equipment. I focused all my energy on describing the kidnappers' faces, every feature etched in my mind from my last life. Piece by piece, the sketches came together. When the finished drawings were compared against criminal records, it didn't take long to identify them, 2 young men with histories of robbery. One of them had even rented an apartment under his real name. The police wasted no time organizing a rescue team. As they left, I sank into the couch, my body trembling. Cold sweat soaked through my clothes, leaving me chilled to the bone. Minutes dragged by like hours. Finally, 20 minutes later, one of the officers returned. His expression was apologetic. Natalie, he said carefully. We searched the house, but your parents weren't there. My heart sank, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. But we did find this, he added, holding up a sealed evidence bag. Inside were dozens of photographs, all taken in secret. There were pictures of my parents. And pictures of me. They've been watching your family for a while. the officer said grimly. "Don't worry, we'll catch them. There's no way they'll get far." But his assurances did nothing to calm the storm inside me. My worst fear had come true. The kidnappers had moved my parents to a new location, which meant every lead I'd given the police was now worthless. From the corner of the room, I heard Landon on the phone with Isaac. Even though he tried to keep his voice low, I could hear every word. "It's real," Landon muttered. "This isn't a joke. There's actual evidence, and the suspects have been identified. You need to come back." Before he could finish, Isaac's voice came through the line, loud and clear. To my horror, he was laughing. That cold, mocking laugh sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, come on," Isaac said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The bigger the show she puts on, the harder she'll fall. Just wait. When Mom and Dad lose face because of her nonsense, they'll drop her faster than she can cry about it." His words hit like daggers, dredging up every ounce of fear and fury from my past life. How could he be so cruel? Even if Isaac hated me, even if he refused to accept me as his sister, how could he ignore the fact that our parents' lives were at stake? I hadn't done anything wrong. And neither had our parents. The son they'd raised and loved for over 20 years was now turning his back on them in favor of Molly, the perfect daughter who wasn't even their own blood. If Mom and Dad knew what Isaac was doing, if they knew he cared more about protecting Molly's feelings than their safety, how heartbroken would they be? I wiped away the tears threatening to spill from my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat. Just then, the house phone rang. The sharp, jarring sound cut through the tense silence like a knife. One of the officers monitoring the line glanced at me, giving me a quick nod. My heart began to race. The kidnappers were calling again. The officer monitoring the line gave me a quick thumbs up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely lift the receiver. To my right, another officer held up a small card with bold black letters. "Stall for time." I took a deep breath to steady myself, but when I finally spoke, my voice cracked, trembling with emotion. I'm getting the money. Please, I'm begging you, don't hurt my parents." On the other end of the line, the kidnapper let out a low, mocking laugh. "Then quit wasting time and move faster. You've got 1 hour." He barked, his voice dripping with impatience. "If you're late, they're as good as dead." Another note slid across the desk toward me. "Ask where the drop-off is. Ask where to meet your parents afterward." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where do I bring the money?" I asked, my words trembling. And after that, where can I meet my parents? Will they be safe?" The kidnapper's irritation was palpable, his tone sharp and cutting. "Put the money in one of the lockers at the train station," he snapped. "And don't worry about your parents. Once I get what I want, they'll be sent back to you safe and sound." My stomach churned. The drop-off point was different from what I remembered in my last life. I needed to keep him talking. Every second counted. If the officers could trace the call, we'd have a chance. "Are my parents okay? Can I hear them? Just for a moment?" I pleaded, forcing my voice to crack with emotion. The kidnapper cursed under his breath and muttered something I couldn't make out. "You're so damn annoying," he spat. Then, out of nowhere, I heard their voices, soft, trembling, but unmistakable. "My parents. Natalie." My father's voice came through, weak and full of pain. "Just knowing we found you again, that's enough for us. Don't do anything reckless, sweetheart." My mother added, her voice breaking with emotion. "Protect yourself." Her words came in a rush, as though she was afraid she wouldn't get another chance to say them. "We love you so much, Natalie. More than you realize. We didn't know how to show it." Then my father spoke again, his voice heavy with regret. "Baby girl, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for losing you all those years ago. If I could go back, I'd do anything to hold you again and tell you how sorry I am, face to face." I tried to respond, but the words caught in my throat. My chest felt tight and I choked back a sob. I wanted to tell them it wasn't their fault, that I didn't need their apologies. I just needed them to hold on to believe in me. But before I could say anything, the line cut out. A loud thud echoed over the receiver, followed by the kidnapper's sharp voice. "Shut up, old man," he snarled. God, rich people are so damn dramatic. Always with the speeches. Then, with cold detachment, he added, "Get the money to the drop-off. If you don't, I can't guarantee your parents will come back intact." And with that, the call ended. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone turned to look at me, their faces grim. "We couldn't trace it," one of the officers finally said, breaking the silence. "They're using tech to block the signal." The ground seemed to fall out from beneath me. My stomach turned, and I felt like I was suffocating. The ransom was the only thing keeping my parents alive. I fumbled for my phone and dialed Kyle, my father's business partner. He'd promised to help me pull the money together. But the line wouldn't connect. I tried again. And again. And again. On the fifth attempt, just as I was about to lose hope, my phone rang. But it wasn't Kyle. Isaac's voice came through the line, clear and infuriatingly calm. He was laughing. "Well," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Are you done with your little performance yet? It's time to end this farce." My heart sank, dread flooding my chest like ice. "What did you tell Kyle?" I demanded, my voice sharp. Isaac's laugh didn't falter. If anything, he sounded amused. "Oh, I told him not to give you a dime," he said casually, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Do you really think anyone's going to hand over $2 million just because you asked nicely?" I gritted my teeth, anger rising in my chest, but before I could respond, he continued. "I explained everything to him. I told him, you were just scheming, trying to steal our family's money. He believed me, of course. Why wouldn't he?" And just like that, any hope I had was crushed. Without the ransom, my parents didn't stand a chance. I knew what these men were capable of. In my last life, I'd read the case files. These weren't amateurs they'd killed before. And they wouldn't hesitate to kill again. The phone rang again, the shrill sound cutting through my spiraling thoughts. I hesitated before picking it up, dread settling heavily in my chest. The kidnapper's voice was sharper this time, his impatience like a razor's edge. "Where's the money?" he barked. "If you don't bring it now, I'll kill them right here and now." It felt like a giant, invisible hand was crushing my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. Sweat trickled down my forehead in heavy drops, falling like rain. The ticking of the clock wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a steady, relentless pounding in my ears, each tick like a hammer striking my heart. I grabbed the card the officer had handed me, my lips trembling as I forced myself to speak. We're still getting the money together," I said, my voice unsteady. "There's not much time left, but we're withdrawing it from multiple banks. You're asking for so much, we need time to hit different branches." The kidnapper let out a low, disdainful chuckle, his contempt practically dripping through the phone. "The Aaron family," he sneered. "All that wealth and you can't even scrape together some measly cash?" My throat tightened and I didn't dare speak again. Even breathing too loudly felt dangerous. But in those few tense seconds of silence, I heard something, a faint sound in the background. A train whistle. Familiar. The officers monitoring the call stiffened too, their eyes alert. One of them motioned for me to stall, keep him on the line as long as possible. "Let me hear them again," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I need proof they're still alive." The kidnapper's patience snapped. "You think the world revolves around you, huh?" He spat, his anger bubbling over. "What are you, some spoiled little princess? Everyone has to bend over backward for you? Final 30 minutes. He growled. No money, no parents. Simple as that. The line went dead before I could respond. 30 minutes. That was all the time I had left now. I stared at the phone in my hand, my knuckles white from gripping it too hard. There was no reasoning with him. The room around me erupted into chaos. Officers were rushing to make calls, trying to expedite the cash withdrawals from the banks. I stood frozen, biting my lip so hard I tasted blood. Closing my eyes, I focused. My mind replayed the last few moments of the call over and over again. And then it hit me. That sound. It wasn't just the train whistle. There was something else, something sharp, eerie, almost like wind screaming through a tunnel. I opened my eyes, my heart racing. Grabbing the nearest officer's arm, I blurted out. Play back the recording. The last few seconds, hurry. Everyone turned to look at me, startled by my sudden outburst. But they didn't hesitate. The recording was rewound and played back, just as I'd asked. There it was. The faint whistle of a train. And that same strange, haunting wind, like a ghost howling just before the call ended. I jumped to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I know where they are. I shouted, my voice shaking with both fear and determination. I know where my parents are. Chapter 2. The police didn't believe me at first. But once I laid out the evidence, detailed and undeniable, they moved quickly. The orphanage where I spent a decade of my life was on the outskirts of town, right next to an abandoned factory. Trains passed by there every day, hauling coal or timber. The first came at 6:10 a.m., the second at 10:30, and the last at 8:30 p.m. like clockwork, never more than 10 minutes off schedule. The timeline I gave the police matched perfectly. That factory, I knew it better than anyone. As kids, it was our playground. Anytime we were allowed outside, my friends and I would race straight there. The factory was surrounded by tall gray cement walls, but the north and south sides each had a massive hole, wide enough for the wind to scream through when the trains passed by. It wasn't just a gust, it was this eerie, bone-chilling howl, like the wail of something long dead, clawing at you, trying to rip your soul from your chest. We loved it. We'd scream and laugh as we ran into the wind, daring it to knock us over. It was wild and reckless, and for a kid like me, who didn't have much else, it was everything. That's why I was so sure the kidnappers were there. Natalie, stay home. One of the officers said gently. We'll handle this. Don't worry, we'll bring your parents back safe and sound. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But how could I sit at home waiting? Just the thought of being away, of not knowing, made every second feel like an eternity. Please? I begged, my voice breaking. Please let me come with you. I only just found my parents again, I can't lose them now. I can't. Maybe it was the way I said it, or maybe they understood how much it meant to me. Either way, they finally caved. I was allowed to ride in the last car of the convoy. As we drove into the outskirts, the city lights faded, swallowed by darkness. The factory loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged and broken against the night sky. We parked far from the factory to avoid tipping off the kidnappers. The officers moved quickly, silently, vanishing into the shadows as they scouted the area. Then, suddenly, chaos erupted. Shouts. The sound of a scuffle. A suspect was dragged out, kicking and cursing, as officers pinned him to the ground. I couldn't wait any longer. Breaking free from the officer trying to hold me back, I darted toward the factory, ignoring their shouts to stay put. I had to see them. I had to know my parents were okay. The darkness pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. I could barely see where I was going when, all at once, headlights flared to life behind me, flooding the area with light. The beams cut through the night, illuminating the factory's crumbling walls and casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. I turned my head frantically, searching every corner, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Mom! Dad! I screamed, my voice raw. And then I saw them. In the far corner of the factory, huddled together. Mom, Dad! I sobbed, clutching them as tears poured down my face. My vision blurred, but I could still see the relief on their faces, the way their expressions softened as they held me close. I choked out. "I found you. I finally found you. This time," I told myself. "This time, I saved them." Relief and joy crashed over me like a tidal wave, but beneath it all was the tremor of fear, the terror of how close I'd come to losing them for good. I reached up to pull the gag from my father's mouth, but before I could, his eyes went wide with panic. Slowly, I turned. Out of the shadows stepped another man, his face twisted into a cruel grin. In his hands, he held a massive iron tool, its edges catching the faint light. "So, you thought you could call the cops, huh?" he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "Well, if that's the game you want to play, let's all die together." Before I could react, he swung the iron tool down with terrifying force. I braced myself for the impact, for the pain. But instead, there was nothing. All I saw was red. "Dad!" 7. My dad was unconscious when he was taken to the ambulance, still calling Isaac's name. My mom fainted from shock. When the surgery light turned on, I waited alone outside. Isaac and Molly walked in hand in hand. "What happened? You usually mess around, but how did you get Dad hurt?" I looked at him coldly, too exhausted to argue. I just said calmly, "The kidnappers did it." Isaac jumped in place. "The actors you hired dared to hurt people. Do you think the Aaron family is a joke? Mom and Dad were blind to bring you back." Molly smirked. "Got yourself in trouble, huh? I told you you'd shoot yourself in the foot. Biological or not, I'm better than you, the adopted one." Isaac caressed her face sweetly, showing no concern for our parents. Even now, they thought I was acting and kept humiliating me. The officer handling the case approached. "Natalie, sign the statement. Don't worry, your dad will be fine." Isaac grabbed the statement, surprising the officer. "Isaac, where have you been? Do you know what your parents went through? Your sister almost got hurt." Isaac read the statement, still in disbelief. "Don't tell me you think I hired actors. This is your colleague." I stood up, glaring at Isaac. "You better pray Mom and Dad are okay, or I'll never forgive you." Years of anger and resentment exploded. Isaac looked panicked but quickly hid it. Molly stood in front of him, acting tough. "Don't blame him. Blame me. Mom and Dad won't scold me. In the end, you'll be the one getting scolded." Molly looked smug and confident. "How can you compete with me? I think you were abandoned on purpose when you were 2. You're just an unwanted child." I couldn't hold back anymore. I stood up and slapped her. Smack. The crisp sound stunned everyone. "You can insult me, but our parents would never abandon me on purpose." Thanks to the kidnappers, the wall between my parents and me had crumbled during our near-death experience. I understood their guilt for losing me and their deep, unspoken love. Isaac, furious, stood in front of Molly to protect her. "You are." He stopped mid-sentence, realizing the consequences of his words. "The surgery is over. Family members, please come forward." Isaac and I rushed to the doctor. Maybe it was divine mercy, but my dad's brain hemorrhage was removed, and he woke up a week later. The first thing he did was call a lawyer to change his will. We all waited outside the room, Isaac visibly anxious. "Mom, what's Dad doing? Is he treating us like outsiders?" After the kidnapping, my mom's attitude towards Isaac had changed. She was visibly upset and didn't hide it. "Just wait. He's your father. Do you want to control him?" Isaac, rebuffed, didn't dare argue and went to smoke in frustration. Molly quickly approached my mom, trying to please her. "Mom, the lakeside villa is too cold. Can I move back?" I almost forgot. A month ago, Molly accused me of poisoning the family with dessert, causing her gastroenteritis. She claimed I was vying for attention and refused to live with me. She demanded a villa from our parents, which was registered in her name. Now that she had the house, she wanted to move back. There's no such thing as a free lunch. My mom didn't look pleased. I can't decide that. It's up to your father. Molly seemed confident, giving me a challenging look. I ignored her. I'd been through this too many times. When I first returned to the Aaron family, I struggled to adapt to the wealthy lifestyle, and Molly constantly mocked me. She said I was stupid, lacked the manners of a lady, and was unpresentable. But my grades were better than hers, and I attended a prestigious university. I could cook and take care of myself, often making sweet treats to please our parents. In my spare time, I volunteered, helping autistic children and stray animals. In contrast, Molly, the pampered princess, had nothing but a bad temper. She mostly relied on Isaac to back her up. I looked at Isaac, who seemed worried. Now, her support didn't seem so solid. After about 2 hours, the lawyer finally came out. Isaac was the first to rush in and kneel by the bed. Dad! I really had something urgent that day and couldn't save you. I really regret it. Molly's displeasure flashed across her face, but she also knelt by the bed. Dad, I'm just glad you're okay. You really scared me. They were good at playing the dutiful children. Molly even managed to squeeze out some tears. But my dad, clear-headed as if he had a new brain, waved them off. Sit down. Stop making noise. Both of them were stunned. In the past, my dad would have been moved to tears, playing out a scene of fatherly love. Now he was as calm as an outsider. I poured my dad a glass of warm water. He took it, his expression softening. You all know what happened yesterday. If it weren't for Natalie, I might not have survived. My mom immediately hugged me, and I patted her reassuringly. It's okay. It's all over now. Isaac jumped up to refute. She just answered the phone and stalled for time. Anyone could do that. My dad's face darkened again. Where were you when I was kidnapped? What did you do? Isaac was speechless. Molly, not knowing better, jumped in. Dad! I wanted to come back, but Isaac insisted you'd be fine. Saying such things now was like touching a sore spot. Only those who had experienced a kidnapping knew it was a matter of life and death. Isaac tried to explain. I thought Natalie was acting. She always competes with Molly for attention. I thought she was trying to trick me into coming home. Reborn, Isaac still misunderstood me deeply. He firmly believed I was deceiving him. I saw my dad's brows knit together. He exuded an aura of authority. Who would joke about their parents' lives? Isaac, do you think Natalie is as immature as you? You two have bullied her together, and she endured it to avoid worrying us. When will you understand your sister's good intentions? Hearing the word sister, Isaac seemed triggered. He stood up abruptly. My only sister is Molly. The next second, a crisp slap landed on his cheek. My mom, with long suppressed anger, stunned everyone. Then get out of the Aaron family with her. Isaac was completely stunned, taking a moment to regain his senses. Mom, what are you saying? I'm your biological son. My mom's gaze pierced Isaac's soul. So what if you're biological? Where were you when it mattered? You were out having fun with your sister. Do you know your father and I almost died? My mom was so agitated she couldn't breathe. I held her, patting her back until she calmed down. We gave you a house and raised you for so many years. We don't expect anything in return. Molly, you should stay away from the Aaron family. My mom started crying. I knew she had thought about this decision countless times. Isaac looked helplessly at my dad, who only gave him an angry glare. Dad! Molly is your adopted daughter. How can she replace her? Isaac was too agitated, realizing too late he had insulted our parents. My dad's eyes were filled with disappointment. You were always rebellious. We sent you to police school to toughen you up, hoping you'd grow. But you only got worse. My dad's words made Isaac tremble with fear and regret. He never expected both kidnappings to be real. He wanted to see me humiliated, scolded by our parents, or arrested for a false report. He thought that would avenge Molly's fall. But now everything was ruined, and Isaac lost his arrogance. He pretended to apologize to our parents. "Dad, Mom, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. My dad cut him off. "You just wanted Natalie out of the Aaron family so you and Molly could be together. You're afraid Natalie will take your place and love." Isaac was completely stunned. His secret was exposed, as if he were standing naked before everyone. "Don't think I don't know about you and Molly. Even without blood ties, it's immoral." My dad knew everything. The relationship between his son and adopted daughter would be a scandal. "Molly and I are in love. We're a perfect match." Isaac still tried to argue. Seeing my dad's growing anger, I quickly adjusted his fur drip. "Dad, calm down. The doctor said you can't get too excited." My dad patted my hand lovingly, but his words were directed at Isaac. "You should apologize to Natalie. Do you think I don't know about what happened 18 years ago?" I felt like I was frozen, shocked by the thought that came to mind. Isaac seemed terrified, his lips trembling, his breathing rapid. My dad sighed, pulling me into his arms. My mom sobbed quietly. "Natalie, you weren't abandoned or lost. Your brother took you out and deliberately lost you." My mom's sobs were heart-wrenching. "Isaac always competed for attention after you were born. He hated that we focused on you. It's our fault. We had to let him take you that day. We were careless." My face turned pale. The truth was like a bomb, exploding in my chest. I had felt a bit guilty for Isaac's remorse, but now it was gone. Isaac lowered his head, then laughed maniacally. "So you all knew. After all these years, it finally came out. I hated her clinging to you. She was just a little kid, knowing nothing. I left her at the street corner and slipped away." My anger was like a wild beast. I rushed at Isaac, roaring. "I knew nothing then. Who gave you the right to decide my fate?" Molly blocked me, still defending him. "He was just a kid. Who would blame a child for a mistake? Stop being dramatic." Isaac was 10 at the time. He wasn't ignorant, he was malicious. He didn't want to share the love. When Molly came, he was almost an adult. My mom held my collapsing body. "Sweetheart, it's all in the past. We'll never be apart again." Seeing my pain, my dad's anger grew. "These are the facts. Your mom and I decided that after we're gone. All the family assets will go to Natalie. You and Molly can leave the Aaron family." Isaac couldn't believe it. He knelt by the bed again. "Dad, I'm your son. If you don't want me with Molly, I'll send her away." Hearing the assets would go to me, Isaac panicked. He was willing to sacrifice his cherished sister. Molly, desperate, knelt by the bed too. "Dad, I didn't mean to embarrass you. Isaac forced me to be with him. He made me move out and demand a house. He taught me to frame Natalie for sympathy." Molly cried, clearly more skilled. Isaac could only glare at her. "Dad, I'm part of the Aaron family. I've lived here for years. You can't kick me out. I deserve a share of the assets." Seeing his beloved sister also vying for the assets, Isaac's face changed. "You have no blood ties to the Aaron family. Why should you get anything? Raising you was a favor. You don't deserve the assets." He scolded Molly as he had always scolded me. My dad sternly rebuked him. "You don't deserve it either. You blamed Natalie for your past life's grudge, causing your sister to fall off a cliff. You have no family loyalty." His words stunned both Isaac and me. It seemed my dad, after his head injury, remembered some past life memories. He knew Isaac had killed me. Seeing his misdeeds exposed, Isaac decided to go all out, threatening our parents. "I won't leave empty-handed. Give me a large sum, and I'll consider taking care of you." He stood up, looking at me disdainfully. "This one can't be relied on. You'll still need me when you're old." My dad crushed his hopes. "Move out of the villa tonight, or I'll have the guards throw you out. After harming your sister twice, how can I expect you to care for me? I'll be grateful if you don't push me off a cliff." Isaac's eyes darkened. Fearing he'd do something drastic, I stood in front of my parents with a thermos. "I'll take good care of them. I won't be an ungrateful wretch like you." Even in his anger, Isaac didn't dare cause a scene in the hospital. He left, saying, "You'll regret this." Molly didn't follow him, continuing to plead. "Dad, Mom, look at me. I'm Molly, your daughter." Moving out was Isaac's idea. "I promise not to see him again. Can I move back?" My mom said one word. "Leave." Molly's intentions were clear. She feared poverty and thought being a rich wife was a good alternative. She and Isaac were two of a kind. After they left, the world felt peaceful. My mom and I stayed by my dad's side. He recovered well. A week later, I brought him home. One day, my dad, drunk, asked if I hated Isaac for killing me in my past life. I shook my head. I believed Isaac truly loved Molly, but not deeply. He was willing to abandon me for her. But for the assets, he'd give up everything. Isaac was that pragmatic. 6 months later, I graduated from college and received an offer from a prestigious foreign university. I was torn between studying abroad and inheriting the family business. My parents firmly supported me going abroad. They said I had suffered enough in the first 20 years. They wanted to make up for it by fulfilling all my wishes. My dad flexed his still strong biceps. "I can handle the business until you graduate and take over." So I chose to study abroad. Every day before I left, I clung to my parents. They took me to change my name. I finally had my own surname. Seeing Natalie Aaron on my ID, I cried, tracing the letters repeatedly. My mom, feeling sorry for my hardships, transferred the family's real estate to my name. I refused, but she said it was to deter Isaac. Isaac was indeed restless. He sent gifts to my parents which were thrown out. He called often, but the housekeeper or maids hung up. Then he started harassing me. He called me a demon, wishing he had drowned me at 2. But his venomous words couldn't affect me. Our bond, already thin, was completely severed. I blocked Isaac and enjoyed a few peaceful days. Then Molly called, crying, "Natalie, don't hang up. Please help me." She was always good at playing the victim. I stayed on the line, curious about her act. "Natalie, I'm pregnant. Isaac kicked me out with no money. Can you help me?" She cried harder. Isaac started drinking after being fired. He took the house. "I'm really desperate," I said. "Oh. Call the police." Then I hung up. Molly eventually found my parents, admitting her pregnancy. Fearing she'd harm herself, they agreed to give them money to live and raise the child. Isaac agreed. We didn't attend their wedding. We knew Isaac married for the money. Less than a month later, Molly miscarried. Isaac, seeing the child as a burden or driven by his nature, beat her during a drunken rage. He was sent to prison for rehabilitation. My parents didn't help him, focusing on me. They carefully selected everything I needed for studying abroad. The night before I left, I had second thoughts. "Dad, Mom, maybe I shouldn't go. I can try my luck here." My mom tapped my forehead. "Don't talk nonsense. You're going because you're excellent. Seize this opportunity." My dad smiled at me. "Come home whenever you want. We can afford the tickets." Despite their words, the thought of leaving tormented me. The next morning, I cried in bed. My eyes were red and swollen. At the security checkpoint, I hugged my parents goodbye. "No staying up late, no junk food, take your medicine on time." My dad nodded. Mom patted my shoulder. Safe travels. I looked back repeatedly, feeling like I saw my past self waving through the crowd. Her lips moved as if saying, "This time, be truly happy." I nodded, saying in my heart, "I will."